Hey, what's going on, APUSH peeps? We got a good video for you today. This one is on Reconstruction, a very important time period in U.S. history. Lots of changes occurred in the country during this time. Before we begin at shout-out time, I want to give shout-outs to Mrs. Berry's class at Morgantown High School, Mr. Krause's class, Ms. Boone's class from Shepherd High School, and Mr. Greg's class in Tampa, Florida. Best of luck, everyone watching. I appreciate it. Thank you for your support and good luck in May. All right, we'll start off with what is Reconstruction? It's attempting to achieve national unification after the Civil War. So it is the literal and figurative rebuilding of the United States. And a major question during this time was who would control Reconstruction? Congress, with people like Thaddeus Stevens, or the president, people like Andrew Johnson. So some Reconstruction amendments you must know. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Some of the most important amendments in our nation's history. 13th, abolish slavery. And here's the House of Representatives celebrating after it passed the House. 14th, granted citizenship and equal protection. We'll come back to that a lot throughout the rest of this course. And the 15th Amendment provided adult male suffrage regardless of race or previous condition of servitude. So this was aimed at former African American male slaves. What are the impacts of the 14th and 15th Amendments? Well, according to the curriculum, it states the women's rights movement was both emboldened and divided. Know that. Some women, like Lucy Stone, argued for universal male suffrage first, with the hopes that female suffrage would come after. But others, like Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, argued against the 15th Amendment because they wanted female suffrage at the same time. Sadly, for women, they would have to wait 50 years to get the right to vote. Okay, presidential Reconstruction. This is from 1865 to 67 under people like Abe Lincoln for a very short time and Johnson. Now, Lincoln's 10% plan was a plan that called for southern states to be readmitted if 10% of voters in 1860 pledged loyalty. 1860 is the election that Lincoln won the first time. This was very lenient, at least according to the eyes of many Northerners in Congress. Now, Johnson had somewhat of a similar plan, and he wanted wealthy plantation owners to ask for a pardon from him. Radical Reconstruction. This is what most people think of when they think of Reconstruction. This is from 1867 to 1877. This is a response to Southerners' actions such as Alexander Stephens. He was the vice president of the Confederacy, and he was actually elected to be the senator from Georgia. So many in the North couldn't believe that the second in command of the Confederacy was back in the U.S. federal government. Also, many Southern states passed black codes or harsh laws that regulated the behavior of African Americans. They could actually be thrown in jail for not having a job. And many in the North couldn't believe that the South was trying to have the same social structure that was in place prior to the Civil War. Reconstruction Act of 1867 divided the South into 5 military districts headed by this dude, future President Ulysses S. Grant. And again, this was a response to Southerners such as Alexander Stephens. So the military is in control of the South. The federal government during Reconstruction is going to have an increased role. Okay, who were radical Republicans? Well, they sought to change the balance of power between Congress and the presidency and reorder race relations in the South. That's straight from the curriculum. They impeached President Andrew Johnson, but the removal was one vote shy. Remember, impeach does not mean removed from office. It simply means that charges are brought against him. Many of Johnson's vetoes were overridden by Congress, including the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which guaranteed protection for citizens, all citizens of the United States. And there's also a reorder of race relations. Several African Americans held political office, such as this guy, Hiram Revels, who was a senator from Mississippi, an African American senator during Reconstruction from Mississippi. Okay, some short-term successes of Reconstruction was political and leadership opportunities for former slaves. The Freedmen's Bureau, definitely know this, star this, circle it, underline, highlight it. This provided food, medicine, clothing, and education to former slaves. Its biggest success came in education. So my guys, I want you to circle the word education for me. And they promised 40 acres and a mule, but this rarely happened. Most often, its biggest success came in education. But I want to look at this political cartoon. We see in the middle a member from the Freedmen's Bureau putting his hand up to a angry mob of whites protecting African Americans behind him. So this visual represents the government taking an increased role in protecting African American rights during Reconstruction. Okay, moving on over to land ownership and sharecropping. Plantation owners still owned a majority of the land in the South, and former slaves had difficulty in acquiring land. Sharecropping emerged, which allowed for former slaves and poor whites to work on farms and exchange labor for land and housing. And oftentimes, former slaves would work for their former owners. Half of the crops were given to the landowner as payment, and if cotton prices fell, which they did in the 1870s, perpetual debt was common for sharecroppers. So this was a way to tie African Americans and poor whites to land. So why did Reconstruction fail? Well, according to the curriculum, it says the North's waning resolve. You need to know this word waning, and I want you to write it the way that I'm going to write it here. Waning, and notice it's getting smaller. It is decreasing. So the North's resolve or desire to keep up with Reconstruction is decreasing. So by 1877, there are economic issues such as the Panic of 1873, and there are political issues such as the election of 1876. And this led many in the North to want to move on from Reconstruction. We'll talk about the election of 1876. That deals with the Compromise of 1877. So Rutherford B. Hayes is a Republican, and I have a video on this, and he's running for the presidency. There are 3 states that have electoral disputes that have electoral votes that are in dispute. And what happens is Congress decides to give all of the electoral votes to Hayes, and he wins the election by 1 electoral vote. Now, he is a Republican from the North. Now, in return, they promised to withdraw the military from the South. So those 5 military districts, gone. The federal government that is down there protecting African Americans, gone. That is all gone from the South. And notice here that the South is voting overwhelmingly Democratic. Southern resistance to Reconstruction included Jim Crow laws, the KKK, and black codes, which we'll talk about right now. So 4 major ways, according to the curriculum, that the South resisted the 14th and 15th Amendments. This makes a great short answer question or even an essay if you ask me. Segregation is one way. Jim Crow laws allowed for inferior facilities for African Americans and whites. Violence was also used, especially groups like the KKK that performed lynchings, not just on African Americans, but on supporters of Reconstruction, but white supporters of Reconstruction in the South. Supreme Court decisions also upheld Southern resistance. The civil rights cases from 1883 stated that individuals and private businesses could discriminate against minority groups. And Plessy versus Ferguson from 1896 upheld the constitutionality of Jim Crow laws, stating that separate but equal facilities were okay. Local political tactics included poll taxes, where you had to pay to vote, literacy tests, where you had to take a test to vote, and whites could get around that by the grandfather clause, which would allow them to be exempted from poll taxes and literacy tests if their grandfather or father could vote in the election of 1860. Remember, in 1860, African Americans could not vote, so they would not be exempt from poll taxes and literacy tests. Okay, 14th and 15th Amendments in the 20th century. We're going to head to the 1900s. These amendments will be used to uphold civil rights, especially when we see the Supreme Court rule in Brown versus Board of Education that separate but equal is not constitutional. Finish up with some test tips for multiple choice and short answer. Remember the North's waning resolve. I can't stress enough, you need to know the word waning. And the desire to change the balance of power between Congress and the president, and also reorder race relations. Methods used by the South to resist 14th and 15th Amendments, absolutely know that. And for essays, you could see something about change and continuity over time for African Americans between, say, the years 1860 and 1877, and the effectiveness of Reconstruction. Thanks, guys, for watching. I do appreciate it. Best of luck on all your exams, especially the big one in May. And I hope to see you back for more videos. Have a good day.